So this session is engaging the decision makers at the airports. It's sponsored by RS&H, ASL Program Management, and Southwest Airlines. I'm going to turn the time over to Corine Nynstrom, and she's the moderator for this session. So take it away.
All right. Thank you all for joining us here. We have some dynamic speakers here today, and I don't want to take up any time. I want to let them share their presentations with you. They're going to each give about a 10-minute presentation, and then if we have time, we will open it up for questions. We're going to try to stay on schedule here. So our first speaker is Charles Hall from McCarran Airport in Las Vegas. Charles.
See, it's afternoon now. Or no, it's still morning. All right. Let's make sure we're on the right project. Okay, you told me that it's clicker. Let's see if we can get ourselves working. All right? He's working on it. All right. Again, my name's Charles Hall. I'm from McCarran International Airport and Las Vegas, Nevada. And this is not one of my normal activities, but someone asked me to come and talk about decision-making at airports and primarily supporting the directors and some of the decision-makers at the airport. There we go. So I got to call out one of our people in the audience, Bruce Doherty, and I'm going to bring him in, but this is the Department of Aviation in Las Vegas. We operate 5 airports. One big one that most people know about, McCarran International Airport. Everybody thinks it's Las Vegas International, but actually it's McCarran. And then we have 4 general aviation airports. And I'm going to try to use these to talk about the decision-making issues because they bring their own issues associated with a big international, 8th in the country airport that brings the directors of aviation and the commissioners of Clark County and the governor, who recently was elected and now is the governor of Nevada. So these decisions can get pretty large and ranging. So, but I think the point of most of these decisions is we've all been making decisions for most of our lives. The process is, do any of us have a quote-unquote process that we lock down, that we use all the time? Probably not. So I'm going to use, we have a North Las Vegas Airport as a general aviation airport north of Las Vegas, quite frankly, and then Henderson. That happens to be Bruce's airport, and Gene Airport, which he's responsible for. And they happen to be the recipients of the corporate headquarters for the Raiders. So you can imagine what kind of decision now Bruce got to go through and the kinds of people he's now talking to about what's going to happen to his airport. Imagine the corporate headquarters is actually broke ground about a week ago. And you're going to have a structure and playing fields and other kinds of activities immediately adjacent to that airport. And I think that brings in a lot of dialogue. What do? I support Bruce and many of the other division managers and the director and the about how we're going to do these things and who do we have to touch? Who do we have to bring into the dialogue about what are we going to do and how we're going to do it? This is what the economy of Las Vegas is generated from the airport. Pretty big numbers. I'm going to have to tell them next time they do this, put a big B next to the $28 billion, because it is the lifeblood, basically, of Las Vegas. The tourism. It used to be gaming. Now it's almost anything, and I think sports is going to become another big part of that activity. And those decisions that we now have to embrace with their decision making. I have an airport council that we run every month, and thank goodness we brought the Raider family in to participate with us on a monthly basis to talk about what kinds of things are they thinking about doing, what are they for sure going to do, whether we want them or not. But I don't think anyone has ever experienced the NFL dropping into your neighborhood. But it's quite unusual. So decision making. And I went through to say, I said, no, I really have never thought about the classic processes of decision making here and what it is. And I did. I went in and I had to do a little research and brought that. I'm not going to try to teach you or explain it to you, but I brought it to you so you could go back like we normally do as human beings anymore. Let's go in here and let's see if I can find a kernel of information here that would be beneficial to me and my set of circumstances and my decision making and the people that I hire to help me and what do they know, and are we on the same page or any page about making these decisions. Airports are enormously complicated organizations, and I've been in the aviation business for 50-some years now. And I worked for the FAA as a government. I worked for private industry as an airline, and now as an airport owner and operator. And quite frankly, they're all foundationally the same for one thing: safety. I don't care what you're going to do, what you're going to talk about, eventually you get down to, is this reasonable and safe for what it is we might want to do? And next is, what's it going to cost me? Those are pretty much the two primary objectives of that. So the kind of things that I think about when I'm trying to help Bruce and others about the decisions that we have to make, whether it's at the big airport or at one of our outlying airports. Is this an organizational issue? Is it an organizational problem I'm trying to deal with? Or is it technical? And if it is, technicals in most cases get pretty easy. Political, the hardest, obviously. I think the biggest part of this is what decision making you're trying to get in. What's the timeliness of this, and what's the appropriateness of the decision you're trying to make? Invariably, almost all airports that I've run into, there's at least 3 of these 5 that you're going to be contending with in one form or another. So I'm going to let you read this. And I'll read a little bit of this at the bottom, because I think it's the most important part of the decision-making, not only process, but it's a cognitive process. Most of the dialogue we have about making decisions is, what kind of information did someone bring to me? And who's helping me dissect the information? But I think for, quote unquote, the decision makers, whether you're the department head or the airport director, or some cases the commissioner, or the decision making is the process of identifying and choosing alternatives based on the values, preferences, and beliefs of the decision maker. And there's many of you in this room who are decision makers. And I wonder how many of you shared with the people that are trying to help you the values, and the preferences of your beliefs, because I think that would help you help them. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Soon to be good afternoon. We'll get this teed up here. My name is Kevin Bumen. I'm the Director of Airports for the County of San Luis Obispo. We have two airports. We have a non-hub airport that has recently opened a new terminal. We'll be talking about that today a bit. And we have a small general aviation airport near Pismo Beach, Oceano Airport. So before we get started, I want to take a survey of the room here. And last year I did this on a really cool online software platform, and this year we're going to do it analog. So how many folks in the room are an elected or appointed decision maker at an airport? You're a board member of some kind. Okay, we may be talking a bit about you. No, please do. It's important that you're here. The second group I'd like to understand in the audience is staff that engages directly with the decision makers. Who here meets regularly, or maybe not so regularly, but you do meet with your board? Thank you. And then finally, if your role is supporting those that meet with the decision makers, I'm thinking consultants and other specialists. All right, good. So we all in this game, we all have a role to play, and I think that is really important as we consider some of the realities of decision-making and decision-makers. This is Kevin's list of the obvious, and I thought it was important to start with the obvious because if you're not directly involved in this process, or maybe you don't deal with this frequently, there are some things you might forget that could be important in finding your way through decision-making. A few I would like to point out let's start with number 3, that most decisions, if not every decision on the airport, has a variety of options in how that decision could result. As someone in the management role at the airport or in the staff supporting role, building those alternatives is critically important and playing them out. What does it mean if we recommend this? What does it mean if we recommend that? What does it mean if the board wants this or wants that? So really thinking about those options and their consequences, because if you look down to number 4, where there's uncertainty related to all of those, we obviously have to be very careful with decisions that lead to unwanted uncertainty. And then all the way down at number 8, the decision maker that may actually make that decision isn't really going to be there someday when that may fully play out. And that creates a whole nother spiral of thought in how do we address the uncertainty. Is the decision maker going to want to make a commitment for the airport that they're not going to be around to see the good, the bad, or the otherwise of? So we could talk a lot more about these in detail, but the final one I would like to point out is number 6, and that particularly if we have new board members or new airport commissioners, more than likely they're not going to be aviation experts. And one of the most important roles that an airport management team can play is helping them understand this business. What should they be paying attention to? What might matter? What isn't necessarily something in their field of view? Help them govern above the technicalities. That's a really, really critical piece of this. I will also mention that the type of governance of the sponsor does play into those previous factors. If the airport is a department within a large city or a county, the level of attention those decision makers are going to pay to the airport is going to be vastly different than a smaller airport that has a body that's appointed or elected directly to serve the airport. So we talked a bit about the engagement team, and everyone has a role to play on this team. As decisions are being created or recommendations are being drafted for decision, the important role that every member plays can't be understated. But as you're crafting that document, if it's going to go to a board level decision or if it's going to be something that works more in a committee level, really think about what is the objective we're trying to achieve here. Is this simply just to inform? Do we need something that really lays out a position and why, and this is the best course of action, so we need to take more of an advocating approach? Are we simply trying to advise that, hey, there are a range of options and they have some various outcomes? Are we working more in a persuasive mode, really thinking about what do we want to have happen here? And those will lead you to different methods of engagement. The direct engagement, we had a great session yesterday about how to hold meetings in really effective ways, and workshops and emails, some of them that we're very familiar with. But I would point you to the value of indirect engagement. And we'll talk about those in a minute when we talk about how we did some things with the terminal in San Luis Obispo. But the one there at the bottom of the list, you may be going, why is he talking about back-channel communication? That's stuff that happens in the world of global politics, not at your airport. It actually is very real at your airport. It's about having a team, both your team and stakeholders, who understand these issues and can help convey messages in ways that are consistent with the thinking of the team. Where this goes wrong is when you get a group of people who are delivering a very inconsistent message that isn't in alignment with the vision of the airport or the team, and now you've got a back-channel problem. I would argue that you can create a back channel of communication that brings value to the decision makers if they have people coming into their offices or their public meetings and speaking about the project in ways that are relevant to them, even if it isn't perfectly aligned with the vision of the airport, at least it's bringing value to the conversation rather than destructive forces, which I'm sure all of us can tell stories about. Media and social media play into this just as well, in that the information that the airport is putting out or that social media is creating about the decision really have to have some alignment with the reality of what you're trying to do. Easier said than done in many cases, but the session yesterday talked all about the power of social media and how incredibly valuable that can be in informing, persuading, advocating, and educating. We need some help here. Whoop, there we go. Too fast. So our terminal project that we did completed a year ago, and in the years before, as we were rolling through various phases of design and then construction, our engagement process spanned years. And in the beginning, 2 years before we began construction, the story was really about the why, the what, and the how. And we started with the why because one of the interesting things about the why of our project is, yes, people saw we had a terminal that was too small, and yes, it was rather old, and we were quickly outgrowing it. But the real reason behind why was we had a mod to standards that we were not going to be able to address the safety issues unless we constructed a new terminal in a new place on the airport. And that really changes the conversation about why you're doing something. People see those obvious issues, but yet when you get down to the real why, the support really changes very quickly. Like, oh, absolutely, yeah, and we're going to get this beautiful new terminal which addresses the things that I see and care about. The board was never opposed to the project, but I would say they were firmly neutral for quite a while, and that was really around financial capability of the airport to do this. The airport was not growing. It was still feeling the full effects of the recession. It had lost 30% of its air service. They hire a new airport director who comes in and says, yeah, we need to build this. And as the new guy, you get that honeymoon period where you can have the crazy ideas and think they're good. And then things start to get real. And people start saying, well, that's wonderful, but how are you going to do this? And that's where the engagement with the community becomes critical, and that you gain the support of the business community, you gain the support of the travelers, and people all start to rally around the idea. Doesn't change the financial realities of it, but you're starting to set the stage for viability. If we do this, there is so much support in the community that the risk becomes, if not perceptibly less, actually less, because we are going to make this successful operationally once it's complete. We got through those various decisions along the way, and we did it in what I would call a milestone-based process, where we allowed off-ramps to the board. We weren't asking them to commit to the entire project, but let us take a phased approach in completing design, in seeking financing, in seeking grants, and there was off-ramps at many points. So if something changed, a critical factor changed, they were not overcommitted and at risk politically for making a decision that would be perceived by the public as, wow, that was an incredible waste of money, or the county's general fund at risk when that wasn't necessary. During the 2 years of construction, we had a project steering committee, and this was critical to having champions of the project in other supporting roles. This included folks from the county council team, from the public works team, from our tenants, the contracting side, the airport staff. We met minimum monthly, and these were the folks who were, again, conveying that story through direct and indirect communication. Everyone's speaking with the same understanding and the same vision for the project, and the status updates that are given have consistency in those informal discussions about the project. The one-to-one meetings and tours, I can't tell you how important that is, both with your electeds as well as the community at whole. It really brings the project to life for people, and it's really interesting when you bring people out to a building that's half constructed, and they may not really understand what they're looking at, but they sure understand the complexity of what is being produced and how it's going to operate. Including the media in those is very important as well. And then the year after we opened, what else is there to talk about? We did this wonderful project, and here we are. Well, the year after is actually very interesting because now you get to talk about the how we did it and the what happens next. That little point in the middle, the transition, is actually a very interesting story above it, outside of that. But the what next is always really interesting because we're able to tell a story now about what is the airport capable of doing today that if you go back in time 2 or 3 years ago, we could never imagine doing this or that or doing this or that way. And what the future looks like because of the changes in the investments that have been made. Having a security checkpoint with multiple lanes, people see that as, well, that's a wonderful customer convenience because we can have TSA pre-check during peak hours. But the other piece of that story they don't understand, when the microphone's working, is that when you have a multi-lane checkpoint at a small airport, if a piece of equipment goes down, you've got a hot spare sitting right there next to it. In the old terminal, when we would lose a piece of critical equipment, the procedures would change and hand screening of various types of things would start to occur, and it was an incredible impact to our operations. Through the tours, through the meetings, these types of things become evident, and the engagement with the decision maker, that level of understanding and support and interest continues to grow. So when things become less understood or more controversial in some way, you've filled that reservoir of support, and you can now start to work through some of the more difficult topics. We're going to switch them out. Thank you. Okay, how's this one work? Very well. The final piece of this in the events, when we opened the terminal, we had some pre-opening events. And while that's fun and everyone's ready to celebrate a new project and it might seem insignificant in the grand scheme of things, I can't overstate the importance of that because that really gives everyone a chance in the community to understand all of the things that have occurred to bring the project forward. It gives the highly engaged decision makers at that point a chance to shine, and it creates overall support for the project going well into the future. And if you kind of get back into the world of media and marketing, the earned media you get out of that is well beyond any advertising you can do into the future about the facility that you've created, the things that your airport is doing and will be doing in the future. So I welcome your questions in a few moments after our last presentation. Thanks for your time.
Good morning, or almost afternoon. My name is Justin Castagna with Aeroplex Aerolease Group. I'm the Director of Operations and Project Management. I'm going to talk to you today about engaging the decision makers from a private sector perspective. In my case, this is pretty unique because I have, I'll call it a pleasure, of being both a tenant and a consultant, so I can kind of come at it from two different perspectives. There you go. So today's discussion, I will go over that private sector perspective, airport tenant versus airport consultant, and then I'm going to go into 2 quick case studies, one of those being a very controversial project in Santa Monica that we undertook with A.A.E., who I know is in the room with us today, and then a couple takeaways. So at any airport, in the private sector, we have the unique pleasure of really not having the ability to make any decisions without all of yours blessing. So that brings into account for us a few different ways that we really need to engage with airports on a different level than I would say the airports need to engage with their sponsors. There's various levels. It goes from anything from your airport maintenance staff, your airport operations staff, all the way up to your executive level staff and ultimately the elected officials. Community members and business leaders. This brings me into something that I'll talk about called trio marketing. Alignment is something that I think is very important as we engage decision makers. Understanding the roles of your, the roles and the goals, that rhymes, the roles and the goals for the elected officials and what they want to do in the community, I think is extremely important as a business on the airport. And if, as a business, we can align ourselves with, I have city here, but it could be city, county, whatever your sponsorship is at the airport's goals and the business's goals, and I'll use Los Angeles later as an example. Sustainability, Mayor Eric Garcetti has a big push for sustainability in Los Angeles, and I'll talk a little bit about how Van Nuys Airport and the collective group of the tenants there has really pushed to further that goal. Working with your airport staff, understanding politics, hierarchy. You never want to be in a position where, as a tenant or a consultant, you are trying to go around a staff member because maybe you're not getting the answer that you want. And you, for example, you need something from an airport operations staff, but he's not being he or she is not being responsive. You never want to be in a position where you go to their boss and then kind of, for lack of a better word, throw them under the bus. And then the next time you need something from that person, they're going to say, well, you threw me under the bus last time, so I'm not going to help you. So finding a way to foster those relationships with those people that you need on the staff is important. And then the last one I have, gaining a mutual understanding. And that kind of ties into the alignment of those goals. So this is a little bit more of the same, but as an airport tenant, a unified approach to collectively assist the airport. This ties in a lot to airport associations. Airport associations are a great thing. Sometimes could maybe be seen as adversarial to an airport. I can talk a little bit about the experience in Long Beach and Van Nuys because that's where I've been. But in Van Nuys, it's really unique. We have some very powerful FBOs, large chain FBOs on the airport that all come together to sit in the same room. Although they all compete against each other, we sit in the same room together to deliver a unified message to the airport, which in turn makes the airport's job a lot easier because, for example, when you're doing land rate increases every 5 years, you can apply one rate to all the tenants at the airport instead of going to each individual and negotiating a different term or increase or rate. So active airport associations and supportive industry associations, MBAA, NATA, AAA, those are all, they play a crucial role in the success of the airport and the success of the businesses. As a consultant, really taking the time to understand the goals of the elected officials and the airport makes a big impact on the messaging that you would deliver as a consultant. As a consultant, you don't always have I would say that differently. You need to be very careful in how you deliver your messaging, and I'll just use that to take me right into the next thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Santa Monica. Bob, I see you smiling back there. This was a very contentious project. I'll give a little bit of background. The FAA and the city of Santa Monica were in a lawsuit and going back and forth, and which ultimately resulted in this consent decree that was between the FAA and the city. That consent decree said that the airport needed to shorten the runway immediately to 3,500 feet, and that the airport could close in 2028. So through that, the airport engaged A.A.E., who in turn engaged Aeroplex to help facilitate that project. Aeroplex's role in that was engaging the stakeholders and coordinating the different interests between the two. Or I shouldn't say two. There were several. So the case study here is, if you can imagine in a project like this, and much of you saw the press that was going on between the FAA, between NBAA, and the users, and then the community groups around the airport and airport staff. It was a very contentious environment at many times. We sat in several meetings where there was long testimony from community members. And so for the project team to really understand the different competing interests of all those parties and align our messaging to all the stakeholders to kind of take into account the different sensitivities that each had was extremely important. And the way we did that was, you'll see at the bottom, sharing expertise and educating, communicating and collaborating, and being transparent. The truth is, when you do a project like this one, where a lot of people weren't happy, being transparent, even though they might not like the answer, you still got to tell them what's going on. So that was extremely important here in this project. And as of right now, that runway is 3,500 feet and is operating today. Now I'll go back to Van Nuys. In Van Nuys, I said earlier, Mayor Eric Garcetti has a big push for sustainability, so there's a trickle-down effect all the way down to the airport, and with the executive leadership at LAWA to push for those initiatives. So there are several different things that have happened, I would say, over the past 3 to 5 years that have really pushed the effort for sustainability. The Los Angeles Green Business Certification, this is something small, and as many tenants might kind of see as a pain, but it went a long way. This included things from choosing different office paper to bio-friendly janitorial and pest control products, recycling and decreases in your recycling and solid waste, and training your employees and your on-site staff to really take account to be green. So collectively, all the businesses at the airport, really took this to heart and made an effort to push this forward. And I don't know exactly how many have this certification now, but I know several of the major tenants at Van Nuys do have this. To move forward, we're starting to see the introduction of solar in Van Nuys. Aeroplex just completed our solar installation on the east side. We were the first installation on the airport. And we're now going out to help other master tenants do the same thing. And I'll kind of go off of what Kevin said and how really pushing that press out makes a huge benefit to the airport. We hosted an event at our facility after our installation was completed, and it wasn't an Aeroplex event. We went to the airport and we said, LAWA, we want this to be your event. We had the executive director there, we had the news outlets there, we had a helicopter that could take press up and go look over the site, and that really created a lot of hype and pushed a big marketing press that really tied together, the mayor's goals for the city of Los Angeles, and that press made the airport look good, which in turn made all the businesses look good. We're also now seeing alternative jet fuel being introduced at Van Nuys. We had an event there a couple weeks ago that did that. And all of this really kind of ties into the importance of a public-private partnership and the collaboration and engagement together between the airports and the tenants and the consultants and all the stakeholders involved, which at Van Nuys, that resulted in Van Nuys has achieved, I believe it's called Carbon Accreditation Level 2. So ACI has a tracking measurement that they have published that Van Nuys has achieved Level 2, and they're in the process of trying to achieve Level 3. So they are, in the long-term goal is to be carbon neutral. That's very long-term, but we're working our way there. It's not working. Oh, there you go. So today's takeaways: collaborate and communicate. In order to engage decision makers at the airport, you really have to be present. You have to make sure that you are aligned with the airport, you're acting as the airport's partner, and you're really pushing to achieve the same goals they are. Strive to resolve issues at the local level first. Try to work with your staff. Try to work with the ops guys, the ops supervisors, the local management. It also kind of depends on the structure of the airport in Van Nuys. Van Nuys is one piece of a larger wheel that is LAX. So a lot of those decisions are made at LAX, but we try to work with the Van Nuys staff first. I have here, and the last one I'll talk about is understanding the goals of the trio. So just to reiterate, we want to make sure that we're aligned between the goals of the elected officials, which trickle down to the goals of the airport staff, and then how can the businesses and the tenants at the airport make sure that we are doing things and putting projects forward that further the community's goals as well. And lastly, celebrate and publicize those successes. Do joint press releases with your airport. Make it a positive thing for the community. And that is it for me. I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had 3 very different presentations here, and so hopefully you were able to relate to all 3 of them in one way or another. We do have a few minutes left, and I would be happy to open it up for any questions that people might have. Oh, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, everybody. A quick question for Kevin. I know this isn't a session on how to build a terminal, but because we're thinking about this. What did your terminals cost? What did the FAA cover of that? And did you have cost overruns in that, and how did you manage those?
So finances on the project, about a $40 million build. We had many different colors of money in the project: PFCs, AIP, CFCs. I mean, I could go on. We had an AIP contribution. We got the $20 million award that is available to non-hubs for terminal construction. And I would say that support was garnered by the FAA because of the MODA standards that was being resolved with the old facility. If we had only had the old too small tired terminal, it would have been a much harder sell. So that was critical in gaining that support. We did a $6 million funding round through the Infrastructure Bank of California, which we are servicing that debt with PFCs. And did we have cost overruns? No. Yeah. There was about $1 million in change orders that sat at the end of the project, and they came from a variety of things. Everything from, hey, we had a subgrade issue compaction problem that was our single largest change order when we had a giant crater in the ground and we couldn't get compaction in the bottom of it. But many of them actually were the result of thinking that was evolving as we were constructing, because our world was changing so quickly. We added an airline, we added multiple destinations while we were under construction, or knew they were imminent once we were going to complete. And so we had concepted opening with 4 aircraft parking positions, with a someday moving to 6, and we ended up opening with 6 gates, 6 parking positions, and flexibility for the airlines to work off position, whether we were in IROPS or we needed to add a gate quickly. We ended up with a mobile solution in our gate that we could move airlines around. So things like that came up, blame the good idea guy in my team that kept finding things that were like, wow, we could do this now, given the changing circumstances. And then we got to the good idea cutoff point and had to stop doing that. So that answer the question?
Yeah. How big was your terminal?
It's just under 60,000 square feet.
Okay, other questions? Well, I have one, and I'll pose it to all 3 of you. If you have projects at a general aviation airport and projects at a commercial service airport, what do you do, are there any key differences in how you engage the decision makers at those types of airport? Do you use a different technique, or do you use the same technique whether it's a GA airport or a commercial service airport?
Okay, in this particular case for Clark County Department of Aviation, which has a commercial airport venue and several general aviation airports and a couple of even almost experimental or remote. So with the decision-making process and the revenue stream managed by one entity, which is the Department of Aviation, it makes it part of a iterative, you won't exclude one for the other, but you would have to decide what level of sharing for the revenue stream, because the general aviation should stand on its own if it can. But it's important that we had a system of airports, because one of the benefits of having the general aviation airport was not to allow general aviation traffic to take out a slot or a revenue slot for a commercial. So we would share that revenue, not try to make an either or, but let's share.
I'll be quick. I would just say, from a private investment standpoint, working at a commercial service versus general aviation airport, in our eyes, really isn't that much different. There may be some security differences during the project. You have TSA, you have Part 139 requirements at a commercial service airport. As they say, once you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. So kind of tying into the session that was just before this, in how their process works for tenant development, that is really what would be different, is understanding and having those relationships with the folks that are the decision makers, so that you can know how to most efficiently and quickly get through that process in a way that's easy for the private investment and also that's easy for the airport. Airports are a lot more welcoming to projects when they know that you understand their process. So gaining a mutual understanding of what the airport has to go through as a tenant on the airport really goes a long way. And the truth is, in our eyes, the airports are going to be more willing to help you if you understand their world.
So in my career, I've had the opportunity to be a part of building both a general aviation terminal and a commercial air carrier terminal. And I think realities 1 and 5, for those who are following along, pertain to that. And what I mean by that is that the complexity, as we talk about in reality 1, is often different in both of those. And then reality 5 is that decision makers can govern an airport or a larger government entity. In the San Luis Obispo project, it's a county department, which is a very small department in a county of almost 3,000 employees and a $750 million budget. This is not the biggest thing going on in that county, and so the level of attention and detail that the decision makers want or care about is much different than in an entity where, well, let's just say the board's going to want to pick the paint color in the bathrooms. And that may not be the best use of your time or their time to get involved in that. So I think that's probably the biggest difference in engagement, is helping the decision makers understand how they can help you, what things they should care about, what things you're going to bring them, and also understand that, no, we're not going to talk about paint color. That's the project team. You'll get to see what the final selection is, but putting some boundaries around that early and helping set those expectations is critical. And the last big difference, I think, would be in the airline build, you have the airlines as a huge stakeholder in that project. And in our case, we have both the regional affiliates running the stations and then the parent companies, the branded legacies that are behind that. So there's a lot more interaction and engagement with your stakeholders than what you would have in the general aviation side.
Well said. Well, thank you very much. If you could give a round of applause to our speakers. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, we're going to be rolling into our next session, which is how to get involved with chapters. So those that are on the panel, if you can come up and we'll get you moving on this. This session is sponsored by Wood Rogers, ASL Program Management.